Where even to begin? 2 weeks ago, worshiping together in the parking lot, talking about the prophet Micah, about how we were to treat one another with kindness, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God, to trust in God's ways. It seems like a lifetime ago in some ways. Remember, Cindy Monroe had brought some bubble making material ready for the kids to enjoy after worship, and some of us adults all joined in and had a little bit of lighthearted fun watching the bubbles float higher and higher towards the sky. I cannot tell you what business we were addressing at Monday staff meeting when the sirens went off, and some in the church took shelter in the basement, and I raced home to make sure that Allie was okay. In 45 minutes, 45 short minutes, it did not matter anymore what we had been talking about because the world had shifted for our community. It was disorienting and really exacerbated by the constant overhanging threat of COVID. Even some of the reactions and the responses that our city and our citizens know all too well from the flood, even the things we knew how to do, became somehow more difficult and hard, hampered by all of these attempts to maintain or continue to maintain safe social distancing practices. It's been quite a year. Barb Wagner suggested to me that we have new designations in Iowa for 2020 for BC and AD. Speaking of before COVID and then after derecho. Our lives heading into this fall look incredibly different than they did last fall. And all of us, in one way or another, are grieving our losses. So this Sunday was supposed to be this big finale to this summer sermon series, the Summer of Love, a whole series talking about God's love for us and our love for one another. Yet somehow none of my notes on the year of Jubilee in ancient Israel really resonated with this moment in our collective lives. Go figure. The best laid plans. However, the Spirit works how she will, and as it turns out, the lectionary passages for today speak for themselves right into the midst of where we are. We begin today with Isaiah and the disorientation that the people of Israel were feeling as they were forced into exile. When we have no say in the sudden disruptions that life can bring, our disorientation is worsened by things such as loss and confusion and remorse even, and anger. The Israelites were forced into exile. They were forced to change. They had lost everything. They had lost their land, their religion, their social structures. Their whole place in the world had been changed and altered dramatically. Nothing is the same as it once was, and people are hurting in their midst. And this writer, this second voice of Isaiah, speaks to exile, speaks to that exile from chapters 40 through 55. And into that exile, he speaks words of comfort and encouragement. In the just 3 short verses that I read for today, Isaiah points towards a hopeful future, continuing this refrain of encouragement, reminding Israel of their past and their past relationship with God. Remember, the rock from which you were hewn is perhaps a reference to God as the rock who is source of life and provision. Remember Abraham and Sarah, Isaiah writes, who in their impossible position and barrenness were promised a prolific future, which indeed has come to pass. And then there is the hearkening back to Eden and the assertion that what once was will indeed be there again. We too know these things to be true, though like the Israelites we may need reminding from time to time. There are indeed deep wells of faithfulness and generosity in us and in our community. We are seeing this unfold again as it did in the days and weeks and months after the '08 floods. Despite the seeming impossibility of our situation, we can trust in God to make a way forward. And all that once was will someday be again as we attend to our relationship with God, with each other, and with creation itself. This is a refrain that can give us hope even when we are tired and worried and hurting. Which then brings us to the second passage from the book of Romans. Here Paul tries to help people understand how to work together as a church, thinking of themselves as different parts of the same body, of one body. He uses this metaphor also in 1 Corinthians. It's a theme that stretches across some of Paul's preaching to different communities. Throughout his ministry, Paul never forgets that we do not exist just as individuals in our individual bodies. We exist as members of the body of Christ. We exist for one another. God enables that body of Christ, to create its own work, its own prophecy and ministry, teaching, challenging, encouraging, giving, leading, being compassionate. We can do these things alone, but we do them with more discernment and more impact when we are part of a larger body. None of us can do it all. Not a single community can do it all either. But God empowers each community to do all that it is called to do in its context. It makes a difference to see church not as a noun but a verb, not as a place to go, but as a living offering to God. I think this is an important truth to remember and to hold on to in this moment in the coming weeks. Each of us have a role to play in our community's recovery from the storm. Each of our churches and all of our organizations have a role to play. Each one is essential, but none of us have to do it all. Sometimes in the face of a disaster such as this, the big physical cleanup and the workers, and those workers get the most attention, but there are so many other places where there is need. Childcare, well person checks, meals, coordination and organization of volunteers, even notes of encouragement, phone calls, and prayers. And it may be that for a time or for a particular task, you need help from another. That's okay. You'll have an opportunity to use your giftedness to help another, and there is plenty of need to go around. And really, I know that you all know that already, because you've been doing it these past 2 weeks. In fact, some of you are doing it this very morning. As worship is posted, we're being the body of Christ for each other and for the world. Now I'm going to let you all finish this sermon.